It's America Recycles Day. And what are we doing today? We are going to be busting some myths about recycling and local recycling. My name is Udara Abesaker Bickett. I use she, her pronouns, and I manage the Rethink Waste program at the Environmental Center. And what do we do at the Rethink Waste program? We do education and outreach related to waste prevention and waste recovery. We're part of the Environmental Center, which is a nonprofit organization working to embed sustainability into the daily lives of Central Oregonians. And we have a number of programs that are both, their own programs, but also really intersect with one another. And we have an energy program, a garden program, and a youth education program that all really work together. And as I mentioned, I manage the Rethink Waste program. So I have a special guest joining me today, and I'm gonna try again to get Riley on here. Let's see, invite.
Hi.
Hi, Riley.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Riley, and like Udara was just talking about, I'm part of a group through the youth groups at TEC. I'm part of Green Leader Coalition, and I've been a member since 2021 when it started last year. And this is just a group focused on like student collaboration in Bend and climate initiatives are the main focus. So we work together, inspiring each other from all four of the high schools in Bend to get different projects done. I'm also a senior at Bend High and part of the like board there. So yeah, at the environmental club. Sorry.
Awesome. It's really great to be in conversation with you, Riley.
Yes.
And so, again, for those of you just joining us, we're going to be busting 5 myths and misconceptions that we hear in our communities, especially when I'm out giving community presentations or tabling at events. So we wanted to take time today on America Recycles Day to kind of dispel some of those myths. And then if we have time today, we'll also dive into some Q&A from you all. And just as a reminder, last year for National Recycling Day, we did a live that really dove deep on recycling do's and don'ts. So we're not going to do that today. But if you want a refresher on that, you can always go watch that recording. But today we're going to cover 5 myths. So Riley, I'll let you jump in with myth number 1.
Yeah, so our first myth is about the chasing arrows symbol, aka the recycling symbol, and what this means.
Yeah, so a myth that we, or misconception that we hear a lot is that the chasing arrow, people recycle by looking at those arrows or that universal recycling symbol. But this is false. The chasing arrows do not mean that something is recyclable. There are actually currently no guidelines around recyclability claims and labeling, such as the chasing arrow symbol on products. So that has resulted in some producers using that symbol on products to mean that their product is made of something that's recycled, so it contains recycled material, or that it contains post-consumer materials, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that product is recyclable. So I know that causes a lot of confusion, so it's totally understandable that people believe that. It's really misleading that products have that symbol, but the reality is that products are designed and put out from all around the world, but they also end up in communities all around the world. And recyclability is really community specific because what local collectors can pick up is largely determined by what facilities are able to accept, sort, process, and in turn, what they're able to accept is determined by what markets there are, or in other words, what facilities are buying recycled content to put into new product. So all that is to say that recycling is really community specific, but those materials are developed around the world, and that labeling gets put on a lot of different things that aren't actually recycled in our communities. So the good news, though, is that the Recycling Modernization Act, which recently passed, and now the Department of Environmental Quality is working to implement. One element of this really big piece of legislation is called truth in labeling. And with that element, what's involved there is a task force that came together to evaluate labeling that currently exists on products that are sold into the state of Oregon, and to develop and report on their findings and recommendations for what labeling should not be allowed on products that are sold in the state of Oregon. So if you're interested in learning more about that, let us know in the comments, and I'd be happy to link to that report.
Cool. So just to like kind of recap what Udara shared, the chasing arrows symbol or the recycling symbol does not always mean that something is recyclable, and following these arrows alone can lead to everything being tossed in the recycling, and that can contaminate a recycling bin. And so this kind of leads into our second myth, that I should recycle everything. And I'm just going to put this in here, wishful cycling or wish cycling.
Yeah, exactly. So another myth, that we hear is, or misconception that we hear in the community is, I should recycle everything, and that's going to do the most good because everything's going to get recycled. But we have a term for that, for the act of throwing everything in the recycling bin just because we really want it to be recycled, and that's called wish cycling, like Riley mentioned. But that can really do more harm than good. So, we've already learned in myth number one why curbside recycling collection materials really are different in every community, right? And so wish cycling, or putting everything in the recycling bin, leads to contamination for the materials that are truly recyclable in your bin. And that means, if you reach a certain threshold of contamination, that entire bin can be doomed to landfill, right? Because what happens is when your bins are contaminated and they get hauled to a collection or transfer station, if most of that bin or a large part of that bin looks contaminated, the processors aren't able to send that to recycling. When it gets trucked over across the mountains to Portland, all of our materials get laid out on these massive conveyor belts. And first, they're sorted by machinery very loosely, but then people manually sort stuff on these massive conveyor belts, right? So you can imagine the more contamination there is, somebody has to process that down the road and separate it. And that just makes it more expensive and can really jeopardize successful recycling programs. Another sort of contamination that we see often is on food residue, or food residue on recyclable materials. So for example, if you have a soda can with soda still inside, or a half-eaten yogurt tub, or a ketchup bottle, all of those containers are recyclable, but the food residue can get in the rest of your bin, and especially if you have paper products, can really contaminate those paper products too. So really important also to make sure that we're cleaning, washing and only placing clean recyclables in the bin. And if you're trying to save water while you're doing that, one way you can do that is to save a little bowl of water when you're rinsing your other dishes, and then use that for your just rinsing out your recycling to make sure that it's clean. So the takeaway here is, if you're not sure if something is recyclable, put it in the garbage bin and send it to landfill instead of jeopardizing your entire recycling bin.
And that's why we're here to talk about recycling and what can go in the recycling and how to avoid that contamination from food residue or non-recyclables with the wish cycling. And that leads into our next myth, which is kind of the other spectrum. It's on the other side, in that we hear a lot that the recycling system is broken. So why should I even bother recycling? Why why would I even try to put something in the recycling when you don't know what's going on with it?
Yeah. So, myth number two, we talked about, people who kind of feel like I should recycle everything. But like you said, on the other side of the spectrum, we also have folks that kind of sometimes think the recycling system's broken, so I shouldn't even bother recycling. So that's false too, right? I totally get where folks can be skeptical about recycling. In the recycling system, there hasn't always been great transparency about where things are going throughout the recycling process. And also in 2018, the national sword policy coming out of China was really a wake-up call and shook up recycling infrastructure in the United States as well. And, what that was, again, a result of contamination, like we talked about in myth number one. China and a lot of East Asian countries that were accepting recycling from around the world saw that there was way too much contamination in what we were sending over as recyclables was largely garbage. And so it was really intensive, in terms of their staff and cost to process all of that, that it, they said, we can't collect this stuff anymore. We can't accept your garbage. So it forced local collectors and local recycling systems here, even in Oregon, to really reevaluate how and what is collected. So we saw some shifts in 2018 around that. So, I totally understand why people might feel that the recycling system isn't working or is broken. Especially when we look closer at certain materials, we see, for example, only 9% of plastic ever produced has ever been recycled. Plus, what we call plastic recycling is really what we should be calling downcycling, because so much of that original product is lost in processing the material, that significant virgin plastic must be added back in. By contrast, though, materials like aluminum and glass are indefinitely recycled back into what it was, right? With relatively lower percentage of virgin materials having to go back into creating a new product. And in fact, 75% of all aluminum is still in circulation, right? Compared to the about 9% of plastic. Again, glass can also be turned back into glass. And in states that have multi-stream collection for glass, for example, like in Oregon, where we collect glass separately curbside, collection rates could be generally over 90% for glass. And then, so what we're really seeing is not a recycling crisis, but really I think of it as a packaging crisis, because so much of the packaging that's out there is just not made to be recycled. And, like we talked about in myth number one, have these misleading chasing arrows that can lead to contamination. So if it's done right without contamination, recycling works. And there are ways that we can make it work even better. We can advocate for policies that hold producers responsible for packaging and labeling. We can also work on purchasing products that are truly recyclable in our communities, and buy products that are also made of recycled content or post-consumer materials. So bottom line, recycling can work if all the players are really invested in making it work, including producers and us as individuals avoiding contamination.
You threw out a lot of great information there, and I feel like the looking at it as a packaging crisis rather than like a recycling crisis is a super important lens, and acknowledging that like 9% of plastic ever being produced has been recycled, well, like that 91% hasn't. And over the summer I went up to the Katmai Coast in Alaska through Green Leader Coalition and the Environmental Center. And in like 7 days, we collected 2 tons of marine debris that was just like dumped and deposited on the Katmai Coast, which is super isolated, but it gets caught in this subpolar gyre and ends up on the coastline. And so I think that seeing something like that, it's important to acknowledge like packaging crisis and how can we recycle. Like, let's take time to learn about recycling, tune into things like conversations like this, and make sure we're putting those recyclables in the right spot so that we can keep different debris and waste from ending up on the coastline and keep it in the system of being reworked and into new material. So the recycling system isn't broken. That's like our takeaway, and it can um, there there's a lot of work that can be done, but there's also a lot of work that already has been done. And that kind of goes into our fourth myth um, to debunk is that I don't have access to a curbside recycling bin, so I can't recycle. What are the workarounds to that?
Yeah, that's another tricky one, but also false, right? So for folks that are renting or live in multifamily housing, like apartments and condos, it might not be as easy to recycle curbside, right? Because it might not be as easy as calling your local hauler and scheduling a curbside pickup. You often have to work with a landlord or property manager to see if they'll consider offering curbside recycling, which may not always be possible. So I totally understand, kind of where this misconception comes from. So, I know we could do a lot more to make recycling more accessible, especially for folks in rural communities and multifamily housing. But one option for folks is to take your recycling or mixed recycling to a recycling depot, also known as a transfer station. If you want to look for one of these, there's 8 locations available for dropping off mixed or commingled recycling. You can, on our website, rethinkwasteproject.org/drop-off, you can find a map of these 8 locations, and you can also take a look at what materials are accepted at each of these locations, because some accept things beyond just the mixed or commingled recyclables, like scrap metal or appliances and things like that. So again, just as a reminder, you can watch last year's America Recycles Day Instagram Live recording if you really want to dive deep into what can and can't go in the recycling bin. So today we're busting these 5 myths. We're on number 4. There are ways that you can take your recyclables to these depots. Another option too is to really work to advocate, maybe with your neighbors, or if you can create like a sustainability team or a recycling team in your community to convince your property managers or your landlord to provide a curbside bin where you live. And we at the Rethink Waste program can also provide signage that you can print out and put on bins in your communities as well. Another kind of update that's coming through the Recycling Modernization Act that we've talked about a few times is potential for service expansion through local government compensation for expanding services into rural communities and folks that don't currently have collection services. So if you're interested in that, I definitely encourage you to get involved in the process around the Recycling Modernization Act. Pretty soon here, there will be a broader call for public comment around how the Department of Environmental Quality will roll out some of these elements. A bonus tip around myth number 4 around recycling, if you don't have a curbside recycling bin, is not to bag your recyclables. So I know it can be really convenient to have a bag for your indoor or kitchen recycling bin and then take that out to your cart or take a bag to the depot, but when you get there, make sure to dump out that bag if you're using like a liner or bag to collect your recyclables, because that bag can also be a contaminant to the recycling system.
Mm-hmm. And one kind of alternate choice instead of using a bag to collect your recyclables is you could use like a cardboard box and keep it in a pantry or a cupboard or something and keep your recyclables in that, and then you can take that and the cardboard box can be recycled as well. So if you don't have access to curbside recycling, it still can be accessed through depots and that. And so now we're on to our last myth number 5. And this myth focuses on milk cartons and coffee cups, and kind of the recyclability of those.
Yeah. Myth number 5, we see often folks, get milk cartons or coffee cups in the recycling because they seem like they're cardboard, and cardboard is recyclable and mixed recycling, or your curbside recycling bin. But milk cartons and coffee cups or things like juice boxes, they're not made of just cardboard, right? So imagine if you had that kind of liquid in a cardboard box, what would happen, right? It would turn to mush. So what often happens for that packaging is that it's lined with a wax coating or a plastic coating. And unfortunately, that cardboard container then is no longer recyclable locally because it's really hard to pull that plastic film and separate that out from the cardboard box that you have for your milk carton or your juice box or your coffee cup. So, this one really gets people confused a lot because it seems like it's cardboard and that it should be recycled, but that is lined or a mixed material should really go in the landfill bin and not in the recycling bin to avoid contamination. A good rule of thumb is that if the packaging is used to contain a liquid or a frozen food or refrigerated food that comes into contact with ice, then it's usually lined in plastic or wax and should be placed in the garbage bin.
There's a good question about what about a paper bag, and that can be used like as a collection device, I guess, for your recyclables, a paper bag, cardboard box, something along those lines, and you can just take it and dump it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just wrapped up our 5th and final myth. So quick summary, myth number 1, chasing arrows, AKA recycling symbol. We're busting that myth. Does not mean that something is recyclable, right? So just because it has a recycling symbol, don't trust that it's recyclable. Myth number 2, I should recycle everything. No, you should not. You should only recycle what is actually collected and accepted for recycling in your local communities. And you can find out more about that on our website, what do's and don'ts of recycling at rethinkwasteproject.org. Myth number 3, the recycling system is broken, so I shouldn't bother recycling at all. Nope, that's not true either. When we're recycling right, and when producers are making packaging that is recyclable and other products that are truly recyclable, we can have a functioning recycling system. Myth number 4 was, that if you don't have a recycling bin curbside, that you can't recycle. Again, that's not true. You can find a recycling depot. There are 8 throughout Deschutes County that you can take your mixed recycling to. And myth number 5 is that milk cartons and coffee cups are recyclable because they're made of cardboard. No, that's not true, unfortunately, because they're usually lined with a plastic wax or plastic film that makes it not recyclable in our community. So we have about 5 minutes to take a few questions. If anybody has any questions, you can write it down in the comments below, or there might be a question mark button on your screen that you can use also. If you have any questions coming in, we'll take those questions. A couple that we saw earlier were, can I toss my pop/drink cans in the bin, or do I have to take them to the deposit location? So this one, yes, you can. You can put your cans, drink cans or bottles that are, that have a deposit into your curbside recycling bin in addition to taking them to a bottle drop location. There's a question here about plastic film or plastic bag recycling. That's a good question. So plastic film and plastic bags cannot be placed in your curbside recycling bin or if you're dropping off mixed recyclables at a depot. However, there are several grocery stores that do accept plastic film. Usually right at the front where you enter, you can return your plastic bags. And I believe that most of those plastic film, plastic bag collection at grocery stores get sent to Trex, which creates this like mixed material decking called Trex decking. There's a question, another question here. Can lettuce boxes be recycled? So lettuce boxes usually come in kind of like a
Clamshell, like the
clamshell.
clamshell shape.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
clam shape, or it's kind of soft and you can squish that plastic box a little bit. So those clamshells or salad boxes cannot be recycled locally. So right now we have to put those in the landfill garbage bin. What we've learned through this Recycling Modernization Act process that DEQ is under, kind of evaluating, one element of this Recycling Modernization Act is to develop the statewide collection list, where everything, that's collected and recycled in Deschutes County is also recyclable and collected in Lane County or Jefferson or, all over the state. So part of that process has been research around where can recyclables be sent and if there's a market for it. And what they've learned in that process is that clamshells, though they're technically recyclable, the current market where they would be sent to be recycled is located in a part of Mexico that's experiencing a really severe drought. And the process of recycling those clamshells is extremely water intensive. And so, is it right to, is it really responsible to send and recycle plastic, those plastic clamshells in a community that is experiencing drought and using up water resources for recycling, right? Alternatively, could we be shifting that packaging to something that is more responsibly recycled? So those are some of the questions that this Recycling Modernization Act process is attempting to answer and work out. Looking at the questions.
We have another question. Will rural curbside recycling ever be available? That was sent in.
Yeah, that's a good question. So rural recycling, that's another potential that we see with the Recycling Modernization Act, which allows for service expansion in communities through what's called local government compensation by producers. So that whole process is getting worked out through the Recycling Modernization Act. Again, those meetings are available to the public and you can find that if you search Recycling Modernization Act, Oregon DEQ, you should be able to access all of those meetings, meeting recordings, audio recordings, and all the materials. So, all of that information is available to the public. And hopefully, rural community curbside recycling is one of the things that's included there. I see a couple more questions. If you can you recycle supplement bottles? If so, what size? Yeah, so the only plastics that are recycled or collected for recycling in Deschutes County are bottles, tubs, and jugs that are larger than 6 ounces. So if your supplement bottles are larger than 6 ounces, they are recyclable. If you secure the plastic lid on the container, is it recyclable? Great question, because right now we don't accept lids in the recycling bin. lids should go in the garbage, and then those bottles, tubs, and jugs can go in the recycling bin. One reason for that is one thing I mentioned earlier around the sorting process when our recycling gets trucked over to Portland is that they initially get sorted by machinery, and the machinery cannot read that flat lid very well. It often gets confused for like paper or cardboard. So lids often end up contaminating the recycling. They can also get jammed in the machinery, so that can also cause problems in the recycling system. So for now, leave your lids out of the recycling bin. Great. Well, I think, do you see any other questions? One last question you want to answer, we want to get to, Riley?
I think that was everything, right?
Yeah, I
So
think,
we have everything.
yeah. So thank you all for joining us on America Recycles Day to
Yeah.
bust some myths with us around recycling. This recording will be up if you missed the first portion of it. We'll save the recording here and you'll get to watch that. And if you have any other questions that come up, feel free to add them in the comments, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And if you are a student or teenager of Central Oregon and you'd like to be a part of the Green Leader Coalition, we have a meeting this coming Sunday from 3 to 5 at the Environmental Center, and we'll be talking about some different projects that we're working on at our individual schools. So come and join us. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Riley, and thanks
Thank
again.
you.